I did it. I swear it was me. The spirits know the truth. They won't let me rest. Please, forgive me.
In the ancient river-bound town of Kissawa, where the red earth breathed history and the spirits of ancestors were said to whisper through the baobab trees at dusk, lived a woman named Sonia Nkali, a woman whose womb had known only silence for 10 long years. Despite every prayer offered at dawn, every herbal mixture prepared by village healers, and every costly journey made to city doctors who swore nothing was wrong with her or her husband, Farouk, a respected trader whose smile slowly cracked with each passing year of childlessness. Kissawa was a place where fertility was not merely personal joy but ancestral duty, and whispers followed Sonia wherever she walked. Whispers sharpened by the cold disapproval of Farouk's mother, Mama Abina, who often reminded her that a woman's worth was measured by the footprints her children left behind. And so Sonia learned to lower her eyes, to avoid naming ceremonies, to swallow her grief in silence until one humid morning when her body betrayed her with nausea, aching breasts, and a heaviness that felt different, ancient, purposeful, and trembling with equal parts hope and terror. She walked alone to a roadside chemist in the city, bought 3 pregnancy tests with shaking hands, and locked herself inside a public washroom where all 3 revealed the same impossible truth. Yet, instead of joy, a deep dread coiled in her stomach like a resting serpent. For 3 nights earlier, she had dreamt of a child standing barefoot in a field of dead millet stalks beneath a sky the color of ash. A boy no older than 7, with eyes to knowing for his age, who spoke with the weight of the grave when he said, "If you bring this child into the world, you will follow me into the land of shadows." Words that echoed now as Sonia stared at the tests and wept quietly. And that night, as the moon thinned like a sharpened blade, she dreamed again, the boy appearing before her as drums beat faintly in the distance, telling her the child inside her did not belong fully to the living, that a deal had been made, sealed not by her hands but by her husband's desperation, warning her to ask Farouk about Makori, the binder, a name that clung to her mind like smoke even after she woke drenched in sweat beside a sleeping man who held her hand without knowing he had already traded her life away. When she finally told Farouk of the pregnancy, his joy erupted like a festival, laughter and tears colliding as he praised the ancestors and promised offerings at the river shrine. But Sonia watched his face carefully and saw something flicker behind his happiness, something buried and afraid. And when the city doctor later confirmed the pregnancy as healthy and strong, Sonia's dread only deepened because the boy's voice returned in her dreams, growing more urgent, showing her visions of women before her, all smiling in early pregnancy, all buried before their children's first cry. And each morning Sonia woke with the same name burning in her thoughts like a forbidden chantmakor, the man whispered about in Kissawa's oldest stories, the one who granted impossible miracles in exchange for life itself. And as the wind howled through the baobab trees that night, and the river swelled unnaturally high, Sonia realized with chilling clarity that her long-awaited blessing had arrived carrying the footsteps of death, and that whatever price had been paid for this child, it was now walking steadily toward her. Morning arrived in Kissawa, wrapped in uneasy silence, the kind that pressed against Sonia and Kali's chest as she prepared Farouk's breakfast and watched him move through the house with forced cheer, praising the ancestors aloud while carefully avoiding her eyes. And though the sun climbed and the village stirred with goats bleating and women pounding grain, Sonia felt as though she alone stood outside the living world, trapped between breath and burial, because the boy from her dreams had returned again before dawn. His voice heavier now, telling her the truth was already inside her home, buried beneath love and fear and 10 years of longing, and that she must uncover it before the child grew strong enough to claim its price. Pretending calm, Sonia accompanied Farouk to the city clinic, where the doctor confirmed once more that her pregnancy was progressing perfectly. Yet, as she listened to the rhythmic beat of the unborn heart, a sudden cold swept through her body, and for a fleeting moment she imagined the sound was not a heartbeat, but a drum calling something ancient closer. And that night, when Farouk fell asleep, Sonia's hands moved on their own as though guided by unseen ancestors, opening his satchel, his phone, his old documents, searching for a truth she feared yet needed, until at last she found a single contact saved without a picture, its name written plainly but weighted with warning, followed by a note that read, "Do not summon unless prepared to lose something forever." And the words sent a tremor through her bones. Because Kissawa's elders spoke of Makori in hushed tones as a binder of paths, a man rumored to stand at the crossroads between life and death, and before doubt could stop her, Sonia stepped outside into the night air, thick with insects and distant drums, and dialed the number. It rang slowly, deliberately, and when a man answered, his voice carried the calm of someone who had waited years for this moment, greeting her by name without surprise, and confirming her pregnancy as though he had been counting the days. And when Sonia demanded to know who he was and what he wanted from her family, the man laughed softly and told her that 10 rainy seasons ago her husband came to him broken and begging, offering anything for a child, and that such wishes were never free, because children born of desperation always demanded balance. As terror clawed at her throat, Sonia demanded to know the cost, and Makori spoke without cruelty, explaining that the child growing inside her required a doorway between worlds, a life force strong enough to pull it fully into the realm of the living, and that doorway was her own life, promised willingly by a man who believed miracles could be bought without consequence. And when Sonia screamed that it was a lie, Makori simply reminded her of the dreams, the boy, the burning name she could not forget, and the way her tongue would soon refuse to speak of him at all, for silence was part of the binding. And as the call ended abruptly, the night seemed to inhale sharply around her, the stars dimming as if ashamed to witness her fate. Shaking, Sonia rushed back inside and tried to wake Farouk, but when she attempted to speak Makori's name, her throat seized and twisted painfully, forcing different words from her mouth, and when she tried to write it down, the ink bled through the paper and vanished as though devoured, leaving only ash that scattered into nothing. And in that moment she understood with soul-crushing clarity that the contract Farouk had signed was alive, enforcing its silence, guarding itself like a jealous spirit. And as she collapsed onto the floor, clutching her belly, the unborn child kicked hard for the first time, not gently as mothers describe, but sharply, possessively, as though reminding her that time was already slipping away. And somewhere beyond the river and the forest, Makori smiled, knowing the bond had tightened and the debt was coming due. From that night onward, silence became Sonia and Kali's prison, a living force that wrapped itself around her words and tightened whenever she tried to speak the truth. And though Kissawa awoke each day with the same familiar rhythms of life, children chasing chickens, elders arguing beneath the nim tree, drums echoing faintly from distant compounds, Sonia moved through it like a ghost, watching Farouk laugh with neighbors, while her own body weakened as though something unseen was slowly drinking from her. And every attempt she made to warn him collapsed into nonsense, because whenever she tried to say Makori's name, her tongue betrayed her, reshaping the sound into harmless words. And when she tried to confess the existence of the contract, her voice cracked and redirected itself toward trivialities, leaving Farouk confused but unconcerned, brushing her worries aside. Desperation drove her to stranger methods, carving symbols into the dirt, drawing images of chains around a pregnant woman, even whispering the truth to the river spirits at dawn. Yet the oath sealed in blood resisted every effort, burning letters from paper, deleting messages from phones, erasing evidence as if reality itself had agreed to protect the lie. And at night, the boy returned again and again, no longer standing alone, but surrounded by silent women with swollen bellies and hollow eyes, their hands resting protectively on children who would never grow. And they told Sonia that love without honesty was the sharpest blade. That silence was how the binder harvested his debts, and that the only way to break such a binding was not by speaking the truth, but by forcing it to rise from the one who buried it. And so Sonia began to change, letting herself grow weak, refusing food, allowing her strength to drain until Farouk's concern hardened into fear, collapsing deliberately in his arms so he could feel how light she had become. And when he demanded doctors and medicines, she whispered that this was not sickness of the body, but sickness of the soul, watching carefully as guilt flickered across his eyes before he buried it again beneath denial. The pressure mounted like a gathering storm, and the night her body trembled uncontrollably with fever, she finally looked at him with a stare so empty it frightened him more than tears ever could, asking quietly if there was anything he had done, any promise he had made in desperation, any truth he had hidden that might now be demanding payment. And in that moment the oath weakened, just enough for her to whisper the forbidden name aloud, like a blade cutting skin. Makori, and the sound of it struck Farouk like a physical blow, draining color from his face as the truth he had buried clawed its way back into his eyes. And when Sonia told him she had spoken to the binder and learned the cost of the child he had begged for, Farouk collapsed to his knees in sobs, confessing that he had never believed the price was real, that he thought fear and theater were all Makori used to control desperate men, admitting that shame and pressure and his mother's cruelty had driven him to sign something he did not understand. And as the words spilled from him, the air in the room shifted, heavy and electric, because confession carried power older than contracts. And somewhere far beyond Kissawa's borders, Makori felt the tremor ripple through the binding and smiled uneasily, knowing the debt had begun to resist. And when Farouk begged forgiveness and offered his own life in exchange, Sonia realized the boy had been right. The choice itself was the key. The moment when desire and love were forced to face each other without lies, and as thunder rolled across the sky and ancestral drums echoed in her ears, Sonia understood that this confession was only the first step, because blood oaths never loosened without demanding one final reckoning, and the path ahead would require not silence, not denial, but a sacrifice far deeper than fear. The confession shattered something unseen, and with its breaking came urgency, because the very next night the dreams changed, no longer filled with warnings alone, but with summons. As the boy appeared beside a towering crossroads, where 4 red earth paths met beneath an ancient Iroko tree, telling Sonia and Kali that the binder could no longer hide behind whispers and silence, now that the truth had surfaced, and that if she wished to live, she and Farouk must face Makori before the unborn child completed its binding. And so at dawn, guided by a message that appeared unbidden on Farouk's phone like a spirit-written command, they traveled beyond Kissawa to the old colonial quarter of the city, where cracked stone buildings stood like forgotten ancestors. Finding Makori's office hidden behind frosted glass etched with symbols of balance and debt, a place that felt disturbingly ordinary. And when the binder himself emerged well-dressed, calm and far to human, Sonia felt both rage and pity collide within her, because Makori was not the horned demon of legend, but a man marked by exhaustion and regret, explaining without pride that he was bound to facilitate such contracts as punishment for a sin of his own, that every life traded weighed upon him like chains, and that Farouk's desperation had merely placed him next in a cycle older than Kissawa itself. When Sonia demanded to know if the contract could be broken, Makori hesitated before admitting there was one final path, a counter-ritual performed only at the darkest phase of the moon, requiring the one who made the bargain, the one whose life was promised, and the binder himself, each offering not blood but truth sharp enough to wound the soul, and even then the outcome was uncertain. For such bindings resisted freedom with violence. Makori warned them that time was thinning, that once Sonia reached the 7th turning of pregnancy, the child would fully anchor itself, and nothing could stop the exchange. And as he spoke, the air grew heavy, and the walls seemed to listen, reminding them that the forces involved were not merciful, only balanced. Farouk accepted immediately, his voice stripped of fear, willing to endure shame, exile, or death if it meant saving his wife. While Sonia felt the child stir within her again, not cruelly this time, but watchfully, as if aware that its fate now hung in a fragile equilibrium. And Makori, for the first time, showed something like hope, confessing that if this ritual succeeded, he would finally break his own punishment, even if it meant facing judgment for the life he once took as a healer who tried to play God. They left the office with the weight of the coming night, knowing the ritual would not merely test love, but strip it bare, forcing each of them to confront the darkest truth they had hidden even from themselves. And as the city's lights faded behind them, and the moon began its slow descent toward darkness, Sonia understood that survival would not come from escaping the contract, but from transforming it, and that at the crossroads, where death and birth shared the same shadow, only honesty would decide which path the child would walk. As the dark moon approached, Kissawa itself seemed to sense the coming reckoning. The river swelling higher than it should, animals restless, elders waking from uneasy dreams they could not explain. While inside their home, Sonia and Kali and Farouk prepared for a ritual that demanded not herbs or blood, but the most painful offerings a soul could give. Because Makori had warned them that the counterbinding would strip away illusion and leave only truth. And so Farouk began first, writing a confession, not just for the spirits, but for the living, admitting publicly that his desperation had driven him to betray the woman he loved, that he had chosen pride over partnership, silence over honesty. And when he shared this truth with his family and the village elders, the judgment was swift and merciless. His mother's voice sharp with disbelief and shame. Neighbors turning away in disgust, yet Farouk accepted it without defense, because each word of condemnation loosened the chains around Sonia's life. While Sonia herself faced a quieter but deeper battle, sitting alone beneath the baobab at dawn, placing her hands on her swollen belly and confronting the fear she had carried since childhood, the fear of being abandoned, of being incomplete, of believing her worth was tied to motherhood. And as the unborn child shifted inside her, she whispered not rejection, but love, telling it she would not cling to life through terror, nor surrender it through despair, choosing instead to trust that truth carried power, even against ancient contracts. And that night the boy appeared one final time in her dream, smiling sadly as he told her the women behind him were watching, that every choice she made echoed backward through their stories, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to walk forward despite it. When the dark moon finally arrived, swallowing the sky in perfect blackness, Sonia and Farouk traveled again to the city, where Makori waited inside a circle of chalked symbols and burning candles, his usual calm fractured by something like anticipation, explaining that once the ritual began, there would be no interruption, no reversal, because balance would be restored one way or another. And as the chants began in a language older than Kissawa itself, the air thickened and the temperature dropped, candles bending as if pressed by unseen hands, and Farouk stepped forward first, speaking his truth aloud as the symbols pulsed red beneath his feet, confessing not only what he had done but why, naming his weakness, his envy of other men, his resentment at being judged, and accepting whatever punishment the spirits deemed fit. And when Sonia stepped into the circle, she felt the fear rise like a tide. But instead of fleeing, she opened herself to it, declaring that she chose love over survival, honesty over control, releasing the belief that the child was her salvation or her curse. And as her words settled, the symbols shifted, responding, waiting, until all eyes turned to Makori, whose voice finally broke as he knelt and confessed the sin that had bound him, how, as a healer, he had rushed, made an error, and killed a young woman, then sought to undo death through forbidden means, condemning others to pay the price he could not face, and when he declared his refusal to complete another contract, offering himself instead to whatever judgment awaited. The room erupted with blinding light and a sound like chains snapping, pain tearing through Sonia's body as something ancient detached itself from her, leaving behind not emptiness but relief. And when the light faded, the symbols were gone, the candles extinguished, and Makori lay unconscious but breathing, while Sonia felt the child move gently, normally, no longer burdened by darkness. And in the silence that followed, they knew the balance had shifted, though the final cost was still unknown. The days following the ritual passed like a fragile truce between worlds, as though Kisiwa itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether the balance had truly been restored, or if the spirits would yet return to collect what they were owed. And Sonia and Callie woke each morning expecting pain or blood or the sudden cold pull of death. But instead she felt only exhaustion and a strange lightness. The crushing sense of wrongness that had haunted her pregnancy now absent, replaced by the steady, reassuring movements of the child within her. Movements that felt alive in a way they never had before. Farouk, stripped of pride and reputation, stayed close to her side, his voice quieter, his touch gentler, as though every moment was now borrowed time. While whispers followed him through the village, some filled with contempt, others with reluctant respect for his public confession, had done what no ritual alone could accomplish, dragging a hidden sin into the open, where it could no longer feed on secrecy. News came slowly of Makori, who had vanished from his office by the crossroads, leaving behind only an empty room and a faint scent of ash and old incense. And when Sonia dreamed again, the field of dead crops was gone, replaced by green shoots breaking through soil. The boy standing alone one last time, telling her that the chain had been broken, that the women behind him could finally rest, but that every freedom carried a scar, and somewhere a price was still being paid. Weeks later, a letter arrived without a return address, written in Makori's careful hand, explaining that the forces he had bound himself to were closing in, that his refusal to complete the final contracts had freed the unborn children, but condemned him to face the judgment he had delayed for years, and that whatever fate awaited him, he accepted willingly, knowing that one life saved outweighed the terror of his own end. Sonia wept for a man she had once hated, understanding now that monsters were often forged by fear and regret. And as her pregnancy progressed, without complication, the village elders began to speak cautiously of forgiveness, reminding each other that the ancestors valued truth above perfection. And when the time came, Sonia gave birth beneath a sky washed clean by rain. The labor painful but ordinary, the child's first cry, strong and unmistakably human. And in that cry, Sonia felt the final thread of the contract dissolve, leaving behind not darkness, but a solemn peace, as if the spirits themselves had stepped back, satisfied that balance had finally been restored. Years passed, and the story of Sonia and Kali became one whispered, not in fear, but in reverence, throughout Kisiwa, because she lived when she was not meant to, and the child she carried into the world grew strong beneath the wide African sky. A girl named Hope, born not as a miracle stolen from the spirits, but as one earned through truth, sacrifice, and courage. And as Hope learned to walk along the riverbanks, where her mother once feared for her life, Sonia often watched her with quiet awe, knowing that every breath the child took was the echo of a broken chain. Farouk remained changed, no longer the man who chased approval or hid behind silence, but one who spoke plainly and acted carefully, teaching his daughter that love demanded honesty even when it cost everything. And though whispers of McCory faded into legend, some elders said that on certain moonless nights a solitary figure could be seen walking away from the crossroads, finally unbound, while others believed his spirit had been claimed as payment. But all agreed that his final act had tipped the scales back toward balance. When Hope grew old enough to ask why her parents sometimes looked at her with tears in their eyes, Sonia told her the truth, not the softened version meant to protect children, but the real one that her life had been fought for, that darkness had once claimed her path, and that it was only through facing fear instead of hiding from it that she now stood in the light. And Hope listened without fear, understanding instinctively that her name was not a wish but a responsibility. As she grew, the girl carried an unusual calm, a sensitivity to truth, an ability to sense when words were hiding something deeper. And the elders said she walked with the ancestors' blessing because her life had been weighed and chosen rather than taken. And on the anniversary of the ritual, Sonia returned each year to the baobab tree, offering thanks not for the suffering, but for the lesson it carved into her soul. That desperation without honesty creates monsters, that silence feeds darkness, and that redemption is not given but earned. Kissawa endured, as all villages do, through droughts and births and deaths, but the story remained, passed from mother to daughter, father to son, a warning and a promise woven into one, reminding all who heard it that wishes demanded responsibility, that love without truth was a curse in disguise, and that even the oldest contracts could be broken if one was brave enough to choose light over ease. And so Hope grew into her name, living proof that when people confront their shadows, instead of bargaining with them, the future can be reclaimed, and that, above all else, was the gift her mother fought to leave behind.